In March 2017, David Friedman became the U.S. ambassador to Israel. David Friedman joins me to speak about the last few years, how things have changed so rapidly, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Felice. Always great to be with you.
October 7th basically changed the world. Everything just turned upside down. The Iranians have been behind the multi-front war that Israel is still going through. Do you think this could have been prevented?
I think so, and I think, as we look at October 7th as having changed the world, but the world started to go in the wrong direction, I think, on January 21st of 2021. I think it begins, maybe it ends, but it certainly begins with Iran. And, when we left office, Iran was on the verge of bankruptcy. Qasem Soleimani, who had been their architect, the chief architect of terror, had been eliminated by the United States, I think, with imposing, great fear and concern on the part of the mullahs. And then Biden comes in, and the whole sanctions program went upside down. I mean, the secondary sanctions stopped being enforced. Iran began to sell oil in large amounts to China, to Russia, two of America's greatest adversaries. And, large specific amounts. There was like a $6 billion gift here, a $10 billion gift there. That seemed to make no sense. So what happened to Iran? Iran more than doubled its GDP in a couple of years by about $200 billion. And what did it do with the money? They didn't build schools or hospitals or roads. They began funding the Houthis in Yemen, Iraqi Hezbollah, the Syrians, Lebanese Hezbollah, and Hamas. And they created the opportunity for these countries to act in concert against Israel, all as Iranian proxies with Iranian support, direction, and funding. Huge change from the Trump administration, and I think that was the root of the problem.
I'm going to cut to right now. I mean, it's really on the heels of the elections. Everyone's wondering what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. Do you feel that under the Trump administration, none of this would have happened?
I do. I think that not only would none of this have happened, I think that we would have gone in a very different direction. I think the Abraham Accords would have been expanded long way. Well, I mean, I think we needed about 6 months more in our administration to get the Saudis on side, and of course that would have then led to a whole, the opportunity was limitless. When we left office, limitless. It wasn't just Saudi Arabia, it was Indonesia, it was, some of the secondary Gulf nations. All of that was right there for the taking, and instead, what the Biden administration did is they turned away from Israel and towards Iran, and that just killed everything. What people need to understand about the Abraham Accords is it wasn't about showing these countries that we could move away from Israel. It was about showing these countries how closely we were aligned with Israel. That's what made Israel the most attractive partner to the Gulf, that they were rock solid aligned with the United States. As that began to fray, okay, and as the Iranian relationship or the failure of the punishment of Iran, began to be evident, these countries looked at Israel and said, well, maybe they're not quite the partner we thought. And so it stagnated all these advancements. And so not only would the bad things not have happened, but I think a lot of good things would have happened.
It's interesting because in your book, Sledgehammer, you explain what you see or you saw as historical mistakes in the Western Middle Eastern diplomacy. And I think that, what did you learn from looking back, having written that book then and where we are now? Regrettably,
my book ended up being true. The predictions ended up being true. I'm sorry for that because they weren't very good predictions. They weren't favorable. What I thought then, and I think what's been proven to be the case, is that the U.S.-Israel alliance, at its strongest, is the fulcrum upon which you can then expand peace throughout the Middle East. As it weakens, those opportunities not only become less, but the potential for malign activity and mischief becomes greater. And so Biden didn't take that advice. He didn't see it that way. He thought that it behooves America to prove to the Muslim world that Israel is just another country, that there always needs to be equal measures of peace, prosperity, dignity. They use those phrases, equal measures, all the time. No. Israel is the single most important ally of the United States in the Middle East. As long as we keep saying that and doing that, we create more opportunity, not less, for peace in the Middle East.
The Biden administration was holding back weapons, the arms embargo that everybody has gotten really apoplectic over. There was a leak from the Pentagon in terms of Israel's Iran plan. This is just some of the things that has happened recently since October 7th. Why is this going on? What do you think is behind this?
And by the way, it's still going on, and there's still a bottleneck with regard to weapons that are necessary, needed by Israel in this war.
Do you know which weapons they are?
Yeah, but I'm not going to talk about it, but I do. The cause, I believe, is unfortunately entirely political. I mean, I don't think anybody with any national security credentials really believes that it's important for Israel to lose this war or to win this war slowly or at a limited. I mean, anybody who's got any national security credentials at all, either they know or they should know that Israel's victory here is essential, not just for Israel, but for Jordan, but for Egypt, and for the entirety of the moderate Sunni Muslim world. I mean, the moderates have to beat the extremists, and every moderate Sunni nation knows that. So what's going on? What's going on is, if you do the math, Michigan becomes an incredibly important electoral prize for the Democrats. Without Michigan, I don't think there's a mathematical path for Kamala Harris to win the election, and they're in the process of losing Michigan. And what they did here, I think, was to sway those in Dearborn and other places. Now it's interesting because if you looked at the news yesterday, a bunch of Muslim imams endorsed Trump. And I thought what they said, I know I'm going a little bit off on a tangent, but I thought what they said was interesting. They didn't mention Israel at all in their speech endorsing Trump. What they said is, we need someone who could stop the killing, right? And stop the killing means end the war. That doesn't mean that Israel should somehow be held back in its efforts to win the war, but it should be done quickly, decisively, and let's start the rebuilding process, okay? And Biden can't make that happen, and they think Trump can. And I thought that was a very accurate observation. The politics has infected the national security decisions in the Biden administration, and it's taken us, I think, to a dark place.
Interestingly enough, and we all know that the Jews tend to vote Democrat. It's reflexive, some say it's DNA, whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. There seems to be some shift. What is your sense of this?
Well, I don't think it's enough of a shift. I mean, I think there is a outside chance that Republicans, that Donald Trump will get 50% of the Jewish vote, more likely to be in the 30s. The 30s is still pretty good historically. Of course, where he's not getting the Jewish vote primarily is in places like New York and California, which I'm not sure it affects the outcome anyway, because of the overwhelmingly Democratic majorities those two states have. But there's two realities here. One of which I get. If Jewish people say, "Look, we just don't care about Israel. We just don't care. We're Americans. We're not interested." There's been that segment of American society forever. I mean, back in the 1940s, there were many Jews that were against the idea of the creation of the state of Israel. Okay, I disagree with them, but I understand at least they're intellectually honest. They don't care about Israel. They care about other things. They care about whatever. They care about, raising taxes on the rich. Okay, that's what they care about. They deeply believe in it. At least they're being intellectually honest. I disagree, but that's their view. But then there are others who really just want to self-rationalize the idea that Kamala Harris will be better for Israel or better fighting anti-Semitism than Trump. I don't think there's any intellectually honest way to get there. And those are the ones that I really have the problem with, because they're deceiving themselves. And I wish they weren't. It'll be better this time than in the past because of the rise of anti-Semitism in America, because of the existential risks that Israel's facing. To my liking, it won't be enough, but it'll be more than in the past.
Let's look at the normalization of the countries and the Arab countries with Israel. And look at Saudi Arabia in particular. They just had military exercises with Iran. They seem to be dancing with both sides. Does that concern you?
Well, they have no choice but to dance because they don't know who's going to win the election. That dance will end if Trump is president, because they'll have a partner that can push back against Iranian malign activity. Right now, they just don't know. Nobody knows. So I understand what countries do for survival and self-protection. I think that if we can get the right president in, I think the Saudis will become great partners of America and great partners of Israel. I think it'll change the Arab world. It'll lead to more expansion of the Abraham Accords, but we need a new president for that to happen.
If it doesn't happen, what happens?
I'm really nervous about that outcome. I think about it all the time. What if it doesn't happen? Who's going to stop the disease that has infected American college campuses? How's that going to stop? It's full of foreign interference, foreign influence. Who's going to take these people that are leading these rallies and send them back where most of them are legal immigrants, but they became legal by falsely presenting who they were when they obtained their educational visas. So who's going to deal with that? Who's going to deal with making sure Israel has the weapons it needs to defend itself? The only thing Kamala Harris has ever said that's in favor of Israel is that they have the right to defend themselves. And I'd like her to point to any country in the world that, after it's been attacked, doesn't have the right to defend itself. It's a meaningless platitude. So, where she goes with that, I don't know. I don't think she really believes in the cause in the ultimate justice of a Jewish state. And I worry about it tremendously. And I don't know what Israel's going to do. Israel will survive it. I don't agree that Israel will cease to exist, but it'll become a real challenging period for Israel. And, you have to ask me the other question: who controls the Senate? If you tell me that the Republicans control the Senate, which I think they will, it's somewhat of a break on a Harris administration. But boy, is that a wasted opportunity compared to what would be if Trump gets in. I think we'll have, in very short order, a totally different Middle East. It could be in a matter of weeks we'll have a very different Middle East.
Senator Lindsey Graham is calling and pushing for some kind of normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel now, even during the Biden administration, for exactly the reason that you just brought up.
Again, I think normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia will be great. Would love to see the details. Hard to comment on something which is just, at this point, aspirational. But that relationship, I think, in the long run, has enormous potential for the region and for Israel in particular.
Ambassador Friedman, I'm glad you brought up anti-Semitism. You lived in New York, you're now residing in Florida. The United States has changed in just a few years, and it has to do with some of the things that you did bring up right now, and it's a big issue. In terms of Jews feeling safe, what will change that?
Very few people understand, and I think my friends on the left should understand this because it's important. In 2019, Donald Trump signed an executive order expanding the reach of Title VI. Title VI is a section of the United States Code that deals with American universities. And he extended Title VI to apply to anti-Semitic conduct, which means what? It means that universities are not entitled to federal funding, and almost all universities get some form of federal funding. They're not entitled to that if they can't protect their Jewish students from hatred and violence, right? Enormously important expansion of Title VI. By the way, it's still there. Biden hasn't undone that, although he's undone hundreds of Trump executive orders, but they haven't enforced it. I mean, the United States government right now could go to Harvard, could go to Yale, go to Columbia, and say, look, we don't believe you continue to be eligible for federal funding. This is a multi-billion-dollar issue for some of these universities. They'll clean things up real quickly if they have a financial incentive to do so. Like most areas, you follow the money, you figure out where the incentives lie. This will cause the universities, I think, to have the incentive to clean this up. Right now, they're not. Right? You can't get tenure on a major American university if you're pro-Israel. We've seen that over and over again. And this is the breeding ground for the leaders of America for the next 20, 30, 40 years. It is the biggest issue, I think, right now confronting America. And the enforcement of Title VI will go a long way. Of course, you have to expand law enforcement generally. We have to enforce immigration laws where a lot of these agitators are foreigners. There's a lot to be done. It can be done very quickly. And that's when I said earlier that Trump could change things very quickly, that was one of the things, the enforcement of Title VI and the enforcement of our immigration laws. I'm not a huge believer in, in kind of how to change the hearts and minds of anti-Semites, because in this, kind of fact-free world in which we live, where there's just, massive amounts of information, people will draw the information that suits their narrative. And, I'm not sure that a lot of these anti-Semites really have hearts or minds that you can really, reach out to. But you can enforce the laws. And you could demand universities to act in accordance with the laws. And I think that's what we ought to be doing in the short run.
There was a time when the pro-Israel community was for a two-state solution. You and I have spoken about this. Yeah. You even, I believe, were for a two-state solution at one point. It shifted. You just wrote a book, One-State Solution. Tell me about it, just briefly, what your vision is and how you feel that that can change the dynamics that we see today.
Well, and let me back up a little bit, because, my vision for a two-state solution when we were supporting it in the government was something that the Palestinians did not think was a two-state solution, because it did involve Israeli security control over the entirety of Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, which to their mind meant that there was never going to be a Palestinian state. And to the extent that there was ever a notion of a Palestinian state that had its own control of its airspace, over its electromagnetic spectrum, of its borders, I mean, I was never in favor of anything along the lines where that would be that type of a two-state solution. So three things have happened since we put out our plan in January of 2020. Okay, so the first is the Palestinian reaction to the plan, right, which was complete, unadulterated rejection, right? And I should also say, that plan included, major changes in the way the Palestinians would govern, a program of human rights, of religious freedom, of financial transparency, right? So it would have changed things a lot had they agreed to it. They rejected it all. So you have the rejection by Palestinians of our plan. That's number one. Then along comes October 7th, right, which we see the capacity of Palestinians for hatred and brutality. And then you look at the polls of Judea and Samaria, of the Palestinians living there in the aftermath, where like 80+% of them were in favor of what Hamas did on October 7th. So you take the Palestinian rejectionism, their support for October 7th, and you then say, okay, does this change the way I think? And in my case, at least, the answer was yes. And so what I did was what caused me to write the book was one more thing, which was, I had a conversation with a very successful Israeli entrepreneur, deeply patriotic, incredibly successful military career, incredibly successful business career. And we were talking about, other things besides business one day. We were talking about Judea and Samaria. And I said to him, what do you think? And he said, look, I don't want to rule over the Palestinians. I haven't been there since I was in the army. I said, well, let's pick a place. Let's talk about a place. So I said, can I talk to you about Shiloh, for example? And he says, sure. I said, do you know what happened there? He says, if I did, I don't remember. So I said, well, look, this is where Joshua, when he took over from Moses on the Jordanian side of the Jordan River, he brings the Jewish people across the Jordan River, parks in a place called Gilgal for 7 years, and then ends up in Shiloh. The Jewish people, the Jewish tribes, this was the center of Jewish life for almost 400 years. It was the Jerusalem before there was a Jerusalem. It's where the tabernacle rested. It's where Samuel the prophet was born. It's where Hannah taught the world how to pray. And he said, well, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, she desperately wanted a child, and Israel was a sacrificial society in those days. That's how they prayed to God. But she decided to pour out her heart to God, and she was, speaking in a low voice in the tabernacle, praying for a son. This beautiful lyrical song that she composed. And the high priest, Eli HaKohen, thought that she was drunk because it had never been done before. So this is the beginning of prayer. So I said to him, look, it's up to you. I'm not an Israeli. It's up to you. What do you want to do? Like, if you want to keep Shiloh, if you do, you're probably going to have to fight for it, whether militarily or at least diplomatically, or you want to give it away. I mean, it's the choice of the state of Israel what they do. But if you give it away, understand, it'll be destroyed. There'll be no semblance of any of the beautiful archaeological findings there. There'll be no sign anywhere of Jewish life from 3,000 years ago. So what do you want to do? So it took him like 10 seconds to say, we have to keep it. And I said, what do you mean you have to keep it? Like, why? He says, well, it's our history. I said, yeah, but the Bible, I mean, if you're secular, you don't believe the Bible was written by God. So like, it's a great book. Fine, there was the Iliad, there was the Odyssey, there are a lot of great books written. He says, yeah, but this is our book. This is our book. I don't care who wrote the book. He goes, this is our book. This is the book that has sustained Jewish life for 3,000 years. This is our history. This is who we are. He even said, would you give away the Washington Monument? So I said to him, look, I agree with you 100%, but 5 minutes ago, you were in a different place. He goes, I didn't know. I just didn't know. I didn't really think about it, didn't really appreciate the importance of these places. I said, well, there's like another 50 places like that, that have great biblical significance. He goes, yeah, listen, maybe we just have to keep them. And I said to myself, I can't have this conversation, a million times. How do I scale this conversation? So the book was really written, it was really written to the Israeli left, not to the Israeli right. I mean, I try to make the case in the book that even if you don't believe at all in any of the integrity of the Jewish texts, if all you care about are the welfare, the security, the human dignity of Palestinians, if that's all you care about, you can be far left. The best outcome is Israeli sovereignty over all of Judea and Samaria, because there is no other governing body. Look around. I mean, look around the region. There's no other governing body that has a track record of empowering an Arab minority other than Israel. 20% of Israel, Green Line Israel, is Arab. More than 20% of the elite universities in Israel are attended by Arabs. You go to Hadassah Hospital with a broken arm. Good chance your arm is going to be set by an Arab orthopedist. Go into a pharmacy. What's the chances that you're not going to have an Arab pharmacist? I have a dear friend who, was the former chairman of Bank Leumi, Arab Muslim. Incredibly inspirational and successful guy. So, if you just care about Palestinians, this is the best outcome for them. Not to have a state run by corrupt leadership that's never had a state before. It's an experiment that we've had. We tried the experiment in Gaza, right? I mean, hasn't been a Jew living in Gaza for, 17, 18 years, right? What did they do with their independence, right? What did they do with the money that was given to them? They squandered it all on terror tunnels and weapons of mass destruction. So why go through this experiment again when Israel has a proven track record of running an Arab minority? And so this book is not, an attempt to convince the right. It's an attempt to convince the left.
What is the reaction of the moderate Muslim states to this book, to this concept?
So there's really nothing to react to yet. I mean, it's just a book that's been out for a couple of months. I haven't shared it. I haven't shared these ideas with President Trump or others. I mean, I think he's got enough going on with the campaign to leave this off to the side. I mean, it's not. I don't think it's worth a reaction just yet. And the most important reaction, candidly, is within Israel. If I went to President Trump and said to him, "Look, I have this idea. I think it's the right long-term solution for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict," his response would be, "Well, what do the Israelis think about it? What do they want to do?" And if I said to him, "Well, I don't know," I think his reaction, quite properly, would be, "Well, what are you wasting my time for? I mean, I'm not getting ahead of Israel on this." So,
is the book in Hebrew?
Yeah, it just came out. It's coming out within a day or two in Hebrew.
Israel is still stuck. It's a multi-front war going on. Gaza, the hostages are sitting. Many are not alive. Lebanon, we see rockets that are flying into Israel on a daily basis.
Yep.
And let's not forget tunnels that are internal. Tulkarem that was found during this year, and there are probably others. In trying to take off the hat of the Jew, and David Friedman as the rich background that you had as a Jew, looking at it just from the outsider looking in, people are very confused. They see this multi-front war. Some people have forgotten that October 7th happened because Hamas breached the border with Gaza. How do you take it to the world at this point and explain that Israel was not the one that began the war?
I think it's going to be hard to really socialize this with the world until it's over. I think once it's over, you can make the case. Look, this is what we did. This is what had to be done. Efforts were made to minimize civilian suffering. We are rebuilding, and this is what the future will look like. I think in the absence of a vision going forward, it's hard to get people all that interested in your side of the case. But the way I look at it is, I think you can tell people today. Again, not everybody cares, but my analogy has always been, to take two people who had serious cancer on October 6th, right? They don't know it yet. They feel fine, but they've got cancer growing inside of them. And over the course of the next year, one discovers it, goes through chemotherapy, suffers through it, has a very difficult time. It's now a year later, not completely out of the woods, but starting to get good test results, starting to get, the PET scans and the CAT scans are showing that the cancer is shrunk. In some cases, it's been eliminated. The other guy still feels fine, right? He's, now you compare these two people a year out, right? And let's say you're a life insurance company, right? Who do you want to write a policy on? Who's healthier, right? So I think that's Israel. I mean, Israel's healthier today than it was on October 6, 2023, because it recognized, again, with great trauma and pain, recognized the trauma, the difficulties, the sickness that was growing, in its neighborhood, started to take steps to address it, has had enormous accomplishments and achievements over the course of the year. And I think it's starting to, see itself in a position of health. Now it's got to obviously deal with, the hostage situation is a lingering massive trauma on the people of Israel and the families, of course, and it has to find a solution to that. It's increasingly, at least seems to me, that solution will come much more likely through something heroic than something negotiated, and I hope and pray that that's something that can be achieved. But you have to get to the other side and then say, we survived this, we're stronger than ever, and you have to start rebuilding relationships, and that could be done, I think, by beginning to rebuild, both inside Israel and outside. Right now, I think it's just awfully difficult.
Who's going to take care of the 2 million Gazans? And this is a question that everyone wants to know.
Well, look, I think Israel's having a lot of advanced discussions on that. I don't think they're sharing it yet, but they're having those discussions. You might say, who would want to have that responsibility? And it will come. I'm sure whoever takes on that responsibility is going to want something in return. I'm asked often, is the one Jewish state applicable to Gaza as well? And I say, I don't know, and I'll tell you why. Because to me, one Jewish state, the book, is a long-term solution, not something that, it's not something where Israel just, gets to 61 seats in the Knesset and tries to push this through. That would be the worst mistake I think it could make. This has to be moved forward on the basis of a national consensus. It takes time. You have to think it through. You got to understand who's going to pay for it and whether, my book is a couple hundred pages. It doesn't deal with this. There's lots of issues that have to get thought through, and you really need to make the case and persuade a lot of people. So it's a long-term solution. We're not ready yet for a long-term solution to Gaza. So Gaza is entirely a short-term problem. People need houses. They need to eat. They need to be. These are issues that until you deal with them, you don't deal with with the one Jewish state issues. Judea and Samaria is not like that. People live there. No one is suffering from from a daily. There's no daily trauma going on in Judea and Samaria. You can talk about the long term there, but I don't think we're ready to talk about that yet.
Politics are dirty. Just recently, the Democrats pulled out a card on Jared Kushner, saying that he was acting as an agent in negotiations with MBS, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. What do you make of it?
Oh, it's nonsense. It's complete nonsense. I'm not sure what conversations Jared's had with MBS. If he had any, they're probably, I would assume they were at the behest of somebody like Lindsey Graham, who admires Jared's relationship with Saudi Arabia. Anything Jared Kushner does in that field is done for the good of America, with the support of America, and I hope that he continues what he's doing, because he developed levels of credibility with Saudi Arabia, with the Emirates, with others in the Gulf that had never been achieved before. And so I hope they continue, and I know whatever he's doing for the benefit of America, not for himself.
There's always that question of, is he good for the Jews? Was President Biden good for the Jews in any shape or form in this last year?
I think his initial trip to Israel was helpful. It gave Israel a sense that the United States is with them. But then I think he just kind of cashed that check. You know, he said, okay, or he checked that box and said, okay, I did that. Now I can be, you know, now I have the credibility to be tougher. Look, withholding arms is, which, as I said, continues to this day. Withholding arms is unconscionable. Failing to intervene with the growth of anti-Semitism, I think, is unconscionable. And I think when you do that, especially because you're looking to get some political points in some you know, places like Michigan, makes it even worse. So, and then I guess the last thing about Biden is, I think even if he wanted to do more for Israel, I mean, regrettably, he doesn't have the mental acuity anymore to do anything. I mean, he just doesn't have it.
Now let's look at President Trump.
Yeah.
And there are people that have a love-hate relationship with him.
Yep.
There are people that have called him a criminal. There are people that say he's done incredible things for the United States economically. There are people that don't believe that. You know this well. But I think what most people dislike is the way that often he just shoots from the hip and says things that are derogatory. You know the man well. How would you defend President Donald Trump?
If they don't like something he said, I would just say get over it. I mean, he's made America a stronger country, a more prosperous country, more respected country. He's been able to export American values throughout the world, throughout some of our, you know, most challenging places within the world. I think he's feared in places like North Korea and Russia, and I think he stood up to China like no president before or after. You don't like something he said, get over it. I mean, like, I don't even spend 5 minutes trying to defend what he says. I mean, I could defend the things that he said, but who cares? I mean, you know, we're talking about somebody who's going to lead the free world to a much better place, and if you're going to refuse him the opportunity to do that because there's something he said that offends you, you know, get over it. I mean, you know, hang around with people that you like. You know, hang around with your wife, your kids, your friends. You don't have to listen to them. But if you close your eyes and you keep them closed for 2 years and you open them again, you're going to find America and the world's in a much better place if Donald Trump is president. November
6th. Ambassador Friedman, are you going to grab that role again or something else?
I don't know what he wants me to do. I really don't know. I will do whatever he asks me to do. I want to be back in the government. Certainly in the aftermath of October the 7th, I really want to kind of help Israel get back on its feet. I want to help America restore its credibility within the world. It's, you know, let's face it. I mean, of all the superpowers, regional and worldly, America's the only country with the values that really make it suitable to lead the world. If America doesn't lead the world, and America hasn't been leading the world in the last 4 years, America doesn't lead the world quickly devolves to a very bad place. So I want to help him. And he has to tell me the way or the ways in which I can be helpful, and my answer will be yes.
Ambassador David Friedman, thank you very much for your time and your insights.
It's my pleasure. Thanks, Felice. Always great to be with you.